So today I'm going to discuss Republic Act number 10173 or the Data Privacy Act of 2012. Nowadays, we all know that of course uh, there are issues no regarding communication, what with the World Wide Web, social media, what with all of this free flow of information, not just in the country but in other jurisdictions, and based on our commitments also with international standards and agreements, we have to come up with our own law, our domestic law regarding the protection no, of the right to privacy. So, under the law, it is the policy of the state to protect the fundamental human right of privacy, of communication, while ensuring the free flow of information to promote innovation and growth. The law also says that the state recognizes the vital role of information and communications technology in nation building and its inherent obligation to ensure that personal information in information and communication systems in the government and in the private sector are secured and protected. So from this, we can see that uh, the coverage of the law is not just the government sector, no, or the private sector, but all. Okay, so any type of information that we process, that we give out in order to protect the privacy of those who own this particular information. But are these particular information, all types of information, yun ba yung coverage nun? Lahat ba, pag sinabi natin na info, covered na ng data privacy law? And what type of information are we talking about? So, first, let's talk about data privacy. So, data information and what are we contemplating when we say that we need to protect this data privacy. So data privacy refers to the right of individuals to control how their personal information is collected, used, and shared. It's about ensuring that personal data is handled responsibly and ethically with respect to our individual rights. For instance, when we, let's say, put in our information, you have this particular form, whether it is online or it is in a document, we put in our information. We put in your name, you put in your, let's say, address, your date of birth, and any other pertinent information. So we usually do this on a daily basis. Anything you enter a website, you need to put in your information. You go to a government agency and you need to identify yourself because you want to transact with that entity. Now, also, when you buy something, sometimes you need to put in your info. You transact with banks and everything. So, in our daily lives, we give out our information. Okay? And before, no, lalo na nung hindi pa yan online, no, hindi pa ganong kadami yan. Usually, we just give out our information when we fill out certain forms. But nowadays, online and even offline, we give out our information, and this is what the law tries to protect, no, our data privacy, which is again our right to control how our personal information is given. Okay, uh, for instance, binigay mo yung address mo, binigay mo yung phone number mo, and then suddenly someone else will be able to access it and use it. Meron nang mag-market sa'yo ng product or services, and you don't know kung paano nila nakuha yung personal information mo. So, we need to protect that, no? We need to be able to consent to entities, businesses, or even individuals when and how they will use our personal information which we gave to them. Para lang din yan, di ba? Yung phone number mo, you just don't give it to someone. Or if you give it to, let's say, a friend or a colleague, sometimes we tell them, oh, don't give it out, no, to just anybody. Huwag nyo ibigay. Huwag mong ikalat yung number ko. I am very sensitive about that, or something like that. So, ganun din. No? That data privacy is what the law tries to protect. Okay. So, under Section 3 of the law, we have this differentiation between the so-called personal information and sensitive personal information. Now, why do we have to distinguish between these two? Because one is just a type of information which we can give out or which we give out on a daily basis, while the other one is that which is protected under the law. Ito yung may mga prohibitions. Ito yung protected under the Data Privacy Act. So, what is personal information? So, personal information is any information, whether recorded in a material form or not, from which the identity of an individual is apparent or can be reasonably and directly ascertained by the entity holding the information, or when put together with other information, would directly and certainly identify an individual. So, if that information can identify you based on Section 3G of the law, then that is considered as a personal information. What would be the examples? Of course, your name. Pagkakakilanlan mo yan eh. And then, obviously, your address, because they would know where you can be located, where your residence is. Or your birth date, okay? Or your email address, because that is a contact information. Your phone number also. For students, your student ID number. Okay? And any social media post which includes your name and location. And that's why ingat tayo sa pagtatag where we are. Okay? Not only for security reasons, but also because it includes your personal information. And then, your online purchasing history. So, yung mga mahilig dyan bumili, di ba, sa Amazon, Lazada, or Shopee, that can be considered as your online purchasing history, and that is considered as personal information. Okay. So, obviously, no, under the law, klaro that an information may be considered as personal information when your identity can be ascertained, no? Meaning that it is apparent. So it's considered as a name tag. Okay? The information relates to an identified person. For instance, my name, Leilani Bernadette Cabras, that is a name tag. Okay? And it is apparent that it identifies me. Now, another instance would be if it can be inferred, no? Or ascertained by the entity holding the information. Kunwari, binigay ko yung name ko doon, then it can already be ascertained that that is me. So, it is considered as a secret code. Okay. So, it's not apparent. I did not give out my name, Leilani Bernadette Cabras, but it can be identifiable by the holder of the information. So, for instance, nag-open ka ng GCash. So, you put in your name. Okay. So, GCash would now have your secret code. Meaning, it is now identifiable because you have that account, and that account is identifiable to you, or it can be ascertained that it is you who holds the account. Now, another is when put together with other information, then it would directly and certainly identify that individual, no? Then it's also considered as a personal information. So, it's like puzzle pieces. So, it is not apparent again, no, the identity is not apparent at first glance, no. So, face value, hindi mo malalaman that that is a person, but that person is nonetheless identifiable if other available information is used. So, hindi siya yung directly. So, the first type is directly ascertainable, like, as I've said, your name. And then, the other one is, even if the name is not there, or it cannot be seen directly, but still the holder of the information, no, knows that it is you. So, kahit na hindi lumalabas, di ba, kunwari, lalagay mo yung nickname, pero yung full name mo is actually there because you registered your name, and that is considered as a personal information. And then the last kind would be if it is like the puzzle pieces wherein when you put two and two together, so to speak, you can still identify that person based on that information or pieces of information. Okay. Now, on the other hand, no, we have personal information, but meron din tayo na sensitive personal information. Okay. So, what is this? This is a subclassification of personal information that requires a stricter protection, no, due to the impact on a person's rights and freedoms. And this is based on Section 3 also of the law. And what would this include? Identity-related attributes such as race, ethnicity, marital status, so age, of course, your birth date, your color, as well as your political as well as religious beliefs. So this relates to your identity, and therefore they are considered as sensitive personal information. It's not just your name, but uh, let's say other attributes of your identity, and then your private life details such as your health, no, so if you're suffering from something, or if you are subjected to certain procedures, that is detail of your health. And then your education, so saan ka graduate, di ba? Elementary, high school, college, and then maybe graduate school. And then genetic information, your sexual life, as well as criminal history. These are considered as private life details. And then government issued identifiers such as your social security number, your GSIS number, your health records, your licenses, no, if you have a driver's license, if you have a PRC license, even your roll number if you are an attorney, your tax returns. These are considered as unique identifiers. Your TIN, no, or tax identification number. And then we have classified information. Ito na yung medyo mas mataas pa. And these are data which are specifically designated by law as requiring special protection. Okay? So, what makes this different, no? Sensitive personal information different from simply personal information is if these are mishandled, then it can lead to harm to the individual, no? Or it can lead to discrimination. Kasi, for instance, for identity-related attributes, religious beliefs, nilagay mo, you're a Muslim, or you're an Iglesia ni Cristo, or you're a Catholic. So, what if you are discriminated based on that religious belief? Or if you put in your political belief, no, DDS ka, o kaya dilawan ka, or whatever. So, you were discriminated based on that. Or someone harmed you because of this particular political belief. No? And of course, let's say your government issued numbers such as your SSS and someone else used that number. Okay? And nag-loan using your number. Okay? Or let's say your health, no, your health records were leaked, and you were discriminated because you put in there, let's say you are HIV positive, and you did not get your that particular job because of your diagnosis. So these are considered as sensitive personal information. It has a higher degree of protection than just simple personal information. Now, okay, so let us further differentiate these two. When we talk about personal information, it is any information that identifies an individual. But sensitive personal information are those specific personal data that requires stricter protection due to its sensitive nature. So it depends on the nature. Again, if it will lead to your harm or it will lead to discrimination against you, then it can be considered as sensitive personal information. And legal basis, Section 3G, no, for personal information, Section 3G of the Data Privacy Act. But for sensitive personal information, you have to refer to Section 3L of the law. And then what is the level of protection? For personal information, what is required is only reasonable security measures, but for sensitive personal information, it requires higher levels, no, or stricter levels of security because of its sensitive nature. Okay, now let's talk about the case of Vivares versus St. Teresa's College. This is a 2014 case, and if I remember correctly, what happened here were there were two students, no, at St. Teresa's College, and they took photos of themselves. O, so yung mahihilig dyan na mag-selfie or whatever, ingat tayo. So they took photos of themselves and they were wearing, skimpy clothing, maybe their undergarments, and one person, no, uploaded, no, one of these girls, no, uploaded the photos on her Facebook, sa kanyang social media account. Okay. Now, a teacher at their school, no, learned about the existence of these sexy photos, so to speak, no. pinakita din ng mga kaklase, yung mga marites na kaklase nung dalawa. So, nakita niya. Okay. And because of this, the school disciplined the students for what? For violation of their code of conduct. And that's why the students filed a petition for the issuance of a writ of habeas corpus, and they claimed invasion of uh, privacy. Okay. So, yung petitioners, of course, were the parents of, or the guardians of these minors, because they, the posters are still minors. So, what happened was the lower court dismissed the petition and saying that the students lost their privacy when they uploaded it to their Facebook account without any restriction. So parang kasalanan nyo dahil ba't nyo in-upload. Now, the issue here is whether or not there was an actual or threatened violation of the right to privacy in the life, liberty, or security of the minors involved in this case, the ones who uploaded the photo. And the answer was no. Okay? So the Supreme Court said that there was no violation of the right to privacy. The Facebook photos were shown to the teacher by the students, and they were friends in Facebook. So the students who showed it to the teacher had legitimate access to the photos, and therefore the school did not resort to unlawful means to get that information or to obtain those photos and to discipline them based on their uploading of such photos. So the court emphasized that privacy settings on social media are not foolproof, and users must exercise caution in sharing information online. So ingat-ingat din pag may time, hindi lahat ipopost, and then of course you cannot later on make an issue out of it if someone else showed you in your skimpy clothes or whatever. And I think this is very timely decision, kasi nga almost all of us are guilty one way or another of oversharing in social media. We share where we are, we share photos, not just of ourselves but maybe of other people, and then we forget to even put restrictions on who can see these photos, and then later on this can be used against us, as in the case of the students who were disciplined by their school based on what they uploaded in their Facebook account. So I think we should really think twice, or even thrice, before posting anything, especially if you're, let's say, occupying a sensitive position, or if your school has very strict prohibitions, anything. So, or baka tayo na yung nakaka-violate because it may not be us, but we posted someone else's photos or information online. Okay? Now, let's talk about the COMELEC, the data breach in the Commission on Elections. This was way back 2016, I think. So what happened was there were some hackers, and the hackers breached the COMELEC website, and then another hacker group released what they claimed were to the entire COMELEC database online. So you could just imagine thousands, millions, not just thousands, millions of information, mostly voters. Okay? So nandun na lahat, and if you have voted, and I assume that you have, then it would include your location, your birthday, and of course your name. So the leak files were so big, 340 gigabytes, okay, and contained sensitive data of registered voters. So this is considered as the biggest private data leak in the Philippines, at least as of date, because it affected millions of registered voters. Okay, so what were the data which were breached here? Okay, so it included sensitive personal information, such as if you submitted, let's say, your passport number or whatever ID you presented when you registered, then That would include that, no, your let's say fingerprints, kasi we are fingerprinted, and other, of course, the information which we put in when we registered as voters. So this is under the category of personal and sensitive personal information as defined under the law. And this particular breach underscores the need for stricter security measures. No? Dapat hindi nangyari yon. Dapat walang ganong data breach or walang ganong data leak, because it really put all registered voters, no, at risk, because we have our sensitive personal information there. Okay, so the National Privacy Commission, which is of course the body which is tasked to implement the data privacy law, no, held the COMELEC liable for violating the Data Privacy Act. That is what happened in this particular case. Now, let's continue. Pagdating naman sa scope ng ating batas. Okay, so to whom does the Data Privacy Act apply? First, it applies to both natural as well as juridical persons, as long as they are involved in the processing of personal data. When we say processing, it refers to any operation or any set of operations performed upon personal information, such as, let's say, the collection, the recording, the organization, the storage, the updating or modification, retrieval, consultation, actual use, consolidation, blocking, erasure, or destruction of data. So it runs the whole gamut of what you can do, or what these natural and juridical persons do with particular data. So whenever we, let's say, put in our name or put in our address or our birth date on any form, whether it is a document, an actual document, or online, then that entity which asks us for that personal information is considered to have processed that already. Okay, and when we say natural and juridical persons, of course, we're referring to individuals as well as entities, whether public or private. Okay, so government and private entities handling personal data, it also applies to these entities, and it covers both digital as well as physical records. As I've said, both online as well as, let's say, the forms, yung ating mga paper, no, yung ating mga documents na nilalagyan natin ng ating personal data. And then the processing was done within or even outside the Philippines, as long as, of course, syempre pagdating naman sa jurisdiction, the data subject, meaning tayo, no, kung sino man yung mayroong may-ari nung information, that is the data subject, no, as long as the data subject is a Philippine citizen or resident, and or the entity has links to the Philippines. Okay, let's say it also operates business here, or there are services which are offered to Filipinos. Now, why do we include this? Because again, because of globalization, because of the fact that we can now deal with entities outside our jurisdiction through online platforms, then as long as they have links to the Philippines, no, even if they do not have physical presence here, then they can also be covered by the law. Okay. But let's go to the exemptions. So yun yung coverage. What about the exemptions? So the law does not apply to information processed for journalistic, artistic, literary, or research purposes. Usually exempted naman talaga yan, because otherwise our journalists, no, cannot do their job. So they can use this personal information in the course of their, let's say, investigating an issue or reporting on a matter, or of course artistic as well as literary and research purposes. If you are, let's say, making a thesis, no, writing a thesis, and you need that, then it will not apply to you. You will not be considered as having processed that personal data. Okay, And then another exemption would be those processed for personal, family, or household affairs. So, huwag naman nating awayin si nanay kasi kinuha yung number mo. Diba? You cannot say, oh, mommy, you cannot, give it out, or that you are already now a processor of my personal information. That would be, of course, ridiculous. And then, another exemption would be information necessary for banks and other financial institutions under the jurisdiction of the BSP. Because meron pang ibang rules pagdating sa ating mga banking regulations. So it doesn't mean that they are exempted literally from the Data Privacy Act, and that they can do whatever they want with whatever info we provided. But still, no, meron pa. And remember, they are under heavy regulation. Okay? Now, information necessary for compliance with the requirements of the Anti-Money Laundering Act. We have here, on the other hand, a law. Okay? And if, let's say, there is a pending case and there is a court order and the bank, for instance, would have to release your personal information because there's an ongoing investigation, then that would be exempted. Also, information related to Section 17 of RA 9510 or the Credit Information System Act. And for those used for public order and safety, exempted din siya. And then information needed by courts in judicial proceedings. Okay? So, if you have a pending court case or if you're going to file a case in court, then that is also exempted. And those which are processed for lawful investigations. Okay? But that doesn't mean, again, that just because these are exempted, that they can already release our information right then and there. No. Meron lang ibang level ng confidentiality. Okay? That is needed there, and there are a different set of rules. So when we say they are exempted, it doesn't mean that, let's say, the court can just release your info to anyone who would like to ask about the pending case against you. No. For instance, here at our office, when there's a pending case against a government official, no, pending here at the Office of the Ombudsman, what happens is we do not just release the status of the case or anything pertaining to the case if that is the requester is not a party to the case or is not even the counsel of record. So that is just an example. So may iba pa ring rules na mag-a-apply in order to for the personal information to remain confidential, even if, as enumerated, these are exempted under the implementation of the Data Privacy Act. Now, let's talk about the case of Ople versus Torres. This is an old case, 1998. And this refers to, ito yung bago tayo nagkaroon ng national ID ngayon. Ito yung unang attempt to have a national ID. So then, President Ramos issued Administrative Order number 308. And it sought to establish a national computerized identification reference system. So, what it wanted was parang US tayo na talagang may card ka, may national ID. Most jurisdictions have a national ID. So, as early as 1998, there was already this attempt to have a national ID. Okay. And the idea, of course, is so that we can transact business with the government for our basic services as well as social security providers, so GSIS, SSS, etc., and to reduce fraudulent transactions. Now, then Senator Blas Ople filed a petition to invalidate that particular issuance, saying that it usurped the legislative power and violated the right to privacy. So the issue, of course, is whether that particular administrative order issued by President Ramos violates the right to privacy, and the answer of the Supreme Court was yes. Okay, so the court found that the AO violates the constitutional right to privacy. And it said that the right to privacy, of course, is a fundamental right, and any government intrusion must be justified by a compelling state interest and narrowly drawn to avoid abuses. Okay? The AO, according to the Supreme Court, lacked sufficient safeguards to protect personal information and is too broad, giving the government a roving authority to collect and use personal data. Okay? So that was what the Supreme Court said. Remember, this was way back in 1998 and wala pang Data Privacy Act. And because of that, hindi natuloy yung unang national ID. Okay, but then eventually, when we came up with this national ID system that we now have, kahit na medyo matagal ang nangyari, I think that the government was able now to safeguard our personal information. And of course, we now have the Data Privacy Act, which will now prevent the misuse of the personal information or the personal data that we give out to them. Again, confidentiality of information has always been there. Okay? So, iba-iba lang yung ginagamit nating batas or rules in order to ensure that information regarding, let's say, cases or whatever we give out to government entities or even businesses, even the banks, it doesn't mean that ngayon lang pinaprotektahan. May protection na even before. But now, we at least have this very specific law prohibiting the misuse of sensitive personal information. But even before, there were already safeguards, except that they were specific, let's say, to the entity which collected them or to the use of the personal information. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we have this term data subject. Okay, so the data subject is the individual whose personal information is processed. So if I give out my name, I am the data subject because that is my personal information which was processed. So it refers to us. Okay, and who are required to comply with the rules on data processing under the law. Okay, so the person or the organization, and as I've said, natural and juridical entities who control the processing or the collection or the use of the personal information. So we need to make sure that if let's say even let's say a government entity or even the private sector would use that personal information, then covered siya, and they must ensure the confidentiality of such information which they collected or which they gave. Okay, so when we give out our personal information, there are certain criteria for the processing of such sensitive personal information and privileged information. So, under Section 13 of the Data Privacy Act, the data subject must give his or her consent. And that's why, if you will notice, when you click something online and you fill it out, the form, the online form, usually there would be this portion where you have to click that you have read the provisions, that you're giving your consent regarding the personal information which you gave to that entity, diba? So kaya minsan mahaba, excited ka na magsimulang bumili o excited ka na gamitin yung app, pero meron pa rin ka na pipindutin kasi you have to give your consent, so usually the provisos are there. And then of course, another criterion would be the processing of the information is provided for by existing laws and regulations. The processing is necessary to protect the life and health of the data subject or another person. And the processing is necessary to achieve the lawful and non-commercial objectives of public organizations and their associations. Or the processing is necessary for purposes of medical treatment. That's why, even if we're embarrassed about it, whenever we go to a doctor, whenever we need to undergo a medical procedure, all of our medical history are taken, everything about us would be there. It's being processed by the hospital or by the clinic or even by the HMO, so they have access to our health records. Okay, and then finally, the processing concerns such personal information as necessary for the protection of lawful rights and interests. Okay. So whenever an entity processes personal information, it shall be allowed, subject to compliance, of course, with the Data Privacy Act and other laws. Because as I have mentioned, I will reiterate, there are other confidentiality laws, and there are other issuances which also seeks to protect the right to privacy as well as the confidentiality of information given by a person. Okay. So, three-pronged yung ating principles na pagdating sa general data privacy. First is transparency. So you must be aware of the nature, the purpose, and extent of the processing of the personal data. Under the law, that is required. So you must be transparent. And that's why you need to put in there yung, sabi ko nga kanina, yung kiniklik natin that we understood it. And that in relation to this, you have to have a legitimate purpose. So, for instance, obviously, when you want to, let's say, enter a website and use the application, then the purpose is there. Diba? You have to do it, otherwise you cannot use the services. So, it must be compatible with the declared and specified purpose. So, let's say if you're opening an account with Shopee, so you have to put in your address kasi yun ang delivery mo, diba? Or you have to put in your name because you cannot just use a nickname for your account. So you need to put in other information there in order for you to be able to use the app. Okay? And then finally, proportionality. So the personal data shall be processed only if the purpose of the processing could not reasonably be fulfilled by other means. So kung di naman kailangan, di ba, na kunin yung particular information na yun and you can still use it or you can still avail of the service, then it should not be done. Okay, it should not be processed at all. But of course, we know that 100% of the time, we need to give out some personal information and some sensitive personal information. So we cannot avoid this. But it must be proportion. Okay? It must adhere to the principle of proportionality. So kung kailangan lang naman is name, address, as well as birth date, pag kinuha pa pati political and religious beliefs and whatever, then that is not adhering to the principle of proportionality. So that is the idea. No? Kailangan kung ito yung purpose and then with that purpose already okay na, bakit kailangan mo pang kumuha ng iba? Okay, so parang baka overkill na. So it will not be proportionate. Okay? So remember the three general data privacy principles: transparency, legitimacy of purpose, and proportionality. Okay. So let me just go back to the idea of giving out, let's say, your phone number, and then when is it that you can consider it a violation of the Data Privacy Act if it is used in an investigation. So in one of the cases, and this I personally know because we handled it here at the Office of the Ombudsman in Soleta. In the case of Soleta was a former assistant ombudsman here at our office, and he was charged, he was implicated in a case involving one of our employees. Okay, so the employee na huli siya and ikinanta niya na ito po yung mga nakakaalam kung sino ang mga nagpapabayad. They were charged with extortion and robbery. Okay, and of course all the other cases and charges that we can think of. So this employee was alleged to have asked for bribes in order to fix a particular pending case. And ayun, nahuli sila ng NBI, pinahuli namin, and he implicated Soleta. And when the investigation was conducted, the proof that was used, the evidence used was that in the text messages between them, forensic yung cellphone, yung number ay kinompare doon sa nandun sa PDS ni A. Osoleta, which is under the custody of the HR, no, of the office. So na-compare, and it was determined that the number appearing in the text exchanges is the same as that which he put in his PDS as his contact number. So doon siya na-identify, okay, that when the employee charge, no, si Leo Nicolas, refers to a certain boss Roy, then he is referring to Soleta with the corresponding cell phone number. So of course they, to make a long story short, they were all dismissed from the service, and then Soleta of course appealed to the Court of Appeals, and then natalo and umabot sa Supreme Court. And one um, of his allegations was that the Office of the Ombudsman, especially the investigators, no, handling his administrative and criminal case in the office, violated the Data Privacy Act when they looked into the his personal data sheet, no, and ascertained therein that the number, no, corresponding to the incriminating text messages were actually his number. And he said that, you know, as a collector of personal information, then the office violated the Data Privacy Act. Now, what the court said was no, there was no violation of the Data Privacy Act. It is not applicable in this case because in the first place, it was an ongoing investigation. And even if, yes, the office is considered as an entity processing personal information, this is altogether different, no, and there's no prohibition because it was part of an ongoing investigation. And when he put it in there was no confidentiality in that, okay, kasi syempre you have to put in your contact information in your PDS. And of course it would be a tool, no, on the part of investigators to look into whatever you put in your own 201 file so that they would know if indeed that is your number. So the Data Privacy Act was not violated here, and of course the Supreme Court upheld his the finding, no, of guilt in his particular case. Okay. So lastly, let's talk about how you're going to look into the law itself. Okay? So, when you, maikli lang naman, hindi naman ganun kahaba ang Data Privacy Act. So, for purposes of, let's say, if you want to understand the entirety of the law, so you have to differentiate into the different sections, no? So, the first 6 sections, no, of course, the definitions and the general provisions. So that's where you're going to see what personal information means, etc. And then, when you go down to section 7 to 10, it talks about the National Privacy Commission. So the powers and functions, the basic powers and functions of the National Privacy Commission, which, as I've said earlier, is the body which is tasked to implement the law and to monitor the compliance, no, of such entities with the law. And then when we go down to section 11 to 21, it talks about the rights of data subjects, which I have discussed earlier, as well as the obligation of the personal information controllers and processors. And then sections 22 to 24 talks about provisions which are specific to government entities, because even if let's say ongoing cases, investigations, etc., or let's say when we avail of services of the government might be exempted from some of the provisions of the Data Privacy Act, it doesn't mean that the government is entirely exempted, no, from the implementation of the provisions of the law. So merong mga provisions which are specific to the government. And then finally, we have sections 25 to 37, which talks about the penalties. So basahin na lang natin yan. Talks about the penalties. For whom? For, or against whom? Those who violate the law. Okay? Whether they be natural or juridical entities. Okay. So, remember, when we talk about data subject rights, it includes the right to be informed, And that's why you have all this disclaimer you have to read before you click. The right to object. So if you don't want to include your this or whatever, then the right to erasure or blocking, the right to file a complaint if you think that there was a breach of their information, the right to access, the right to rectify, the right to data portability, and the right to damages. So isa-isahin natin. What are these? So as a data subject, you have the right to be informed whether your personal data are being or have been processed, including the existence of automated decision making and profiling. Okay, so you have to know we have received your information and it is now with us, it has been collected, blah blah blah. Then we also have the right to access. So it means that as a data subject, you have the right to obtain confirmation on whether or not the data relating to you are being processed, as well as information about any of the following. So the contents of the personal information and categories of data that were processed, the sources from which personal data were obtained, if the data was not collected from you. Okay, so saan nila nakuha yon? And then the purpose, of course, of the processing, how it was processed, and the names and addresses of recipients of the personal information. Okay, ito yung mga kapag nag-sharing na ng info. Then, the reasons for the disclosure of the personal information to recipient. Bakit ipinasa doon? Then, the date when his or her personal data were last accessed and modified. The period for which particular categories of information will be stored. And finally, the designation, name, or identity and address of the data protection officer. Okay, so we have the data protection officer. It is required under the law that all entities should have a DPO. So, for instance, one of the questions would be, can I request access to the personal data of another individual? Generally, no. Okay? Your own data, you can access, but not any other individual. Again, this is the general rule. There are exceptions. For instance, if you're acting for and in behalf of that individual, then you might be allowed access. And let's say you have to apply for from the Philippine Statistics Authority. So there are instances when you can ask for information regarding someone else, not you. Okay. So another limitation would be, let's say, if the information is already publicly available, nakalagay naman na, let's say, nasa website ng office ng ombudsman yung pangalan ko, nandun na yon, and then my office number, so that is publicly available because you can access the website and see my name there, my designation, as well as how I can be contacted, maybe even my email. And then repeated identical or similar requests, if the request for access has been previously granted. So hindi hindi mo na rin ma-access yon if panay na lang hingi mo nung info na yon. And then if the request or access will entail a disproportionate amount of effort or resources, so masyadong mahirap para i-access. And then if providing access to the information may cause serious harm to your physical, emotional, or mental health, so your right to access such information would also be limited. Now, right to object. Okay. When can you object to the processing of your personal data? Okay. If there's any significant change or amendment to the information provided to you in a consent form, kasi diba, dapat may consent. So, parang mali. Diba? So, you can object to the processing of your info. You can also object if it is for direct marketing. Kaya diba, kapag sinabi, are you willing to accept, let's say, to receive emails rather from this? Lagay mo no. Diba? Otherwise, papadalang ka talaga niyan ng mga ano-ano. Or if it's for profiling or any other similar case. Okay. So, if you object to the processing of your data, then that entity should cease the processing of such data. Okay? Because they have to comply with the objection. Unless nasa exception na naman siya under sections 12 or 13. Okay. nag-object ka na eh. So, hindi na nila pwedeng ituloy. Stop na sila dapat. Okay. Now, rectification. The right to rectify also belongs to the data subject. So, if you want to dispute the inaccuracy or error in personal data, remember, no, when they process it, pagpipilitan nila, ganito spelling yung pangalan mo. Dapat, diba? You have the right to rectify it. No, my name is like this or this, etc. So, the right to rectification, no, however, does not include instances where the rectification or correction requires a court order. So, hindi mo pwede ilagay ito na ipagpilitan na ikaw ay female kung ikaw naman ay talagang male by birth. Kasi kailangan na yan ng order from a competent court. So, kunwari, di ba, rectify ko po kasi ngayon babae na ako, dati lalaki ako. No, hindi ka papayagan. Hahanapan ka talaga yan ng order from a competent court kung pwedeng palitan yung gender mo o whatever mo doon, di ba? So, again, may limitation din sa right to rectification. Okay? Now, what about the right to erasure or blocking? So, you can request the withdrawal, suspension, blocking, or destruction of your personal data from the filing system. Okay? And when do you exercise this? So, you may exercise your right if the personal data is already incomplete, outdated, false, or unlawfully obtained. If used for an unauthorized purpose, syempre, if no longer necessary for the purpose for which they were collected, or it concerns private information that is prejudicial to the data subject, unless it is justified by freedom of speech, or of expression, or of the press, or is otherwise authorized. And if the data subject objects to the processing and there are no other applicable lawful criteria for processing, the processing is unlawful, then you can also exercise your right to have your info erased or blocked, or if the entity violated the rights of the data subject. So, you have that right because it's your information. Pwede bang i-deny? Inas mo na, tanggalin nyo na, burahin nyo na yung mga info ko dyan sa inyong database or whatever, data bank. So, yes, the entity may deny our request. Okay? If it's still necessary, okay, if for the fulfillment of the purpose of the data, compliance with the legal obligation, if it is due to any legal claim, syempre kailangan din nila, kailangan pa rin nila, or legitimate business purposes of the entity, or to apprise the public rather on the matters that have an overriding public interest, and as may be provided by any other existing law, rules, and regulations. So, from this, no, hindi pa tayo tapos sa mga rights ng data subject, pero makikita na natin na hindi naman talaga absolute yung ating right. Okay? Parang ang doon sa kaso ni Zoleta, sabi niya is na-violate daw yung kanyang right because sinilip yung PDS niya at doon tuloy nalaman na yung number niya ay yung number nga na tinetext, no, for them to commit these crimes. So, hindi niya pwedeng sabihin that there was a violation because the office had the right to that information because it was part of his 201 or his personnel file. So, there was no violation. It was not unlawfully processed, no, and it was not even unlawfully used because it was used because of an ongoing investigation. Okay. Now, right to data portability. So, you can ask, no, a copy of our personal data or to have it, transmitted from one entity to another para hindi na paulit-ulit. Usually in an electronic format, no. So, as long as if the processing, no, is based on consent or contract, and also if the personal data is processed by electronic means and in a commonly used format. So, para hindi na paulit-ulit yung pagpasok ng information, as long as you consent, then you can, just transfer your data from one entity to another. Okay? Then, of course, you have the right to file a complaint. If you feel that you have your information was misused, maliciously disclosed, or improperly disposed, or anything not related to this, then you can file a complaint. And where do you file your complaint? You file your complaint with the National Privacy Commission. Now, when there's a complaint and you feel that you have really sustained damages, then you have the right to damages or the right to indemnity. Okay. Then, yun nga, file ka na ng complaint, and then the NPC will resolve that, and then they can grant you damages or award you damages. Okay. So, that's about it. Again, remember that the Data Privacy Act is one of the more recent laws that we have, which conforms with the technological advances that we are experiencing now. Okay, so we communicate, no, our means of communication are no longer simply based on, let's say, getting form and writing it down and then physically submitting our information to an entity. No, it's more than that. In fact, I think at this point in time, most of our transactions are already online, at least where it involves, no, giving out of personal information. And in our daily lives, we usually give out such information, maybe even not knowing that we are oversharing, so to speak. So it's good to know that we have our rights under the Data Privacy Act, and we have to be able to see whether or not such information which we give out are being misused. Okay? Because it's our information after all. Pero, as we said, even if there is a law, even if the law gives us all these rights, etc., first and foremost, we must be vigilant, okay? And we must be very aware and conscious of what information we give out, especially in social media. Okay? Sa mga iba kasi, no, whenever we fill out forms, whenever we transact, then sometimes, no, or at least most of the time, we really have to do that. Okay? Otherwise, we cannot transact business with the entity, and otherwise, we cannot get, let's say, a license, or we cannot avail of a governmental service. But especially if it involves, you know, our own choice, let's say, of entering a website or posting pictures, no, on our Facebook account, or availing of TikTok, no, wherein of course we give out our personal information and we upload, no, certain for personal information and even sensitive personal information. Just take note that the caution, no, starts with us. Even if the law is there, we need to be the one, no, first and foremost, tayo yung gatekeeper. Ano ba yung info natin? And I like to use the term, we should not overshare, okay, our own information. Even if you're gonna do anything about the transactions that we enter into requiring our personal information, even if it's really part and parcel of our lives now that we have to give out our names, our date of birth, or whatever, because otherwise we cannot avail of such services, or we cannot do anything because it is a requirement. But there are things which are within our control, okay, and that's why we should be able to not just disclose our personal information, especially our sensitive personal information, so that we can help out, no, these entities, no, the collectors, the ones who process our personal information. Sa atin magsisimula yung pag-iingat so that such personal information will not be misused. So, for instance, when we enter a website, we make sure that it's legitimate, that it's not a scam, etc., or that we have read the provisions, no, we have read their disclaimer or whatever, and we understood, no, that maybe we are waiving some of our rights when we use such service, or when we avail of whatever that website tells us that we need to give out. So please, let's do that so that the purpose, no, of the law, no, of the Data Privacy Act will be able to will be able to comply with the purpose of the Data Privacy Act, which is to strengthen the protection of our right to privacy, especially our right to protect our private, no, private as well as personal information. So that's about it, and I'll see you in the next meeting.